And so, here we are, the top 20. We've worked all the way from 50 right down to 21 in my personal favourite vehicles list. We've had vehicles which you did expect, vehicles which you didn't expect, and more often than not, especially in, say, the 20s and 30s, cars which a lot of you guys expected to be higher on the list. And of course, probably the most shocking one of all was demoting my previous favourite car right down into the 20s, and that was, of course, the Shizeta, the V16T. This is a similar occasion, because this is a car which before, I believe the last time in fact that I did a countdown, I put this as one of my top 10 favourites. And at the time that was definitely true. But in a similar way to the Shizeta, it's a car which over time I have felt the need to lower a little bit, to the point where even when I first made the list for this countdown, it was still in my top 10. But, once again, I realised that it was there just because I would automatically put it there. But when I actually sat down and specifically considered each and every vehicle, it didn't really deserve a place there anymore. However, I do still love it definitely enough to have it in my top 20, right on the cusp of top 20 in 20th place. And the car, for those who perhaps don't know, most do of course, we've discussed it on Drive Club, we talked about it in Unsung Heroes, and in episodes of Beards and Cars as well, even in my Dream Garage. And the car is the Savage Rivale. And this is a vehicle which I would most definitely put in the category with stuff like the Nissan GTR, the Aston Martin Rapide, the Ferrari FF, the Tesla P90D, even the Lister Storm, for being those truly usable, practical, top-tier performance cars, the majority of which you could legitimately call supercars. Some, such as the Tesla or the Rapide, not so much. Definitely super saloons, borderline super sports cars, but not quite supercars necessarily, although their performance could be similar to one. Then in the case of something like the FF or the Lister, they are most definitely supercars. And in the case of this one as well. Now this one is technically called, I can't recall if it's the road yacht or the land yacht, I think it's the road yacht, but I don't like that connotation. I don't like the kind of throwback that it has in a roundabout sort of way to the 70s era of American luxury cars, where due to fuel crises and various other things they became front-wheel drive and had these big engines but that didn't put out a huge amount of power. They all started to get super boxy and lose all of their style and class. And those are kind of what I think of under the road yacht section of vehicles, so I don't really want to put this car in that category because it doesn't deserve to be. Now it is definitely a car that divides opinion. They drove it on 5th gear. Jason Plato drove the GTR version, which is the more track-inclined variant. He wasn't a fan of it, but he's not even a fan of V8 engines, according to him, so not exactly the best person to drive the car. And even for me, it was kind of a similar scenario, because when I first saw the Savage Rivale, it was at the Goodwood Festival of Speed. It was that same version, the liveried and winged GTR version, which I'm still not a huge fan of. To me, it misses the point of the car. I saw it at Goodwood. I didn't know anything about it. I just thought it looked kind of weird, didn't really suit having a rear wing. But I took a picture of it, moved on to more interesting stuff, and then it left my mind completely until I started playing Drive Club on the PS4. I went on that game, noticed that it was on there, and of course I did that 50 episode run of reviews for many of the cars in that game. And it was one of the episodes. I thought, well, I've got to do one, got to do a little showcase, so let's give it a drive. And then as I was driving the car, I realised that I actually like this. Not only does it sound good and handle really well, but I looked at the specs and then I did a Google search to learn more about the car. Why did it have this strange shape? Then I came across the fact that it's a 4-door, 4-seater and a convertible. And then you look at the videos of this thing's roof opening and it looks incredible. Really, probably the best looking convertible setup I've ever seen. Is it needlessly complex and probably unreliable? Yeah, sure. Is it awesome? Yeah, definitely. It's a 4-door, 4-seater convertible limo supercar. And it's legitimately all of those things. Plus, you've got an engine which I love. I love American engines which, they're not necessarily massive, but they're certainly not traditional small blocks. They're not like 4.3 litres or 5.7. They're more in the region of like 6.2 to 7 litres, that kind of sweet spot. And this has one of those, a very popular, one of the best-selling engines in the world, in fact, the Chevy V8. and it's got a lot of power out of that engine. 670 horsepower in road form, which is called the GTS. It's around a 205 mile per hour car. The handling is supposedly quite good, actually. A little bit of understeer, but it's not an overly heavy car either. And the car, although physically large, handles itself very well. Now, in terms of practicality, it's not quite as good as something like the Ferrari FF. In some ways, it is superior, such as access, because you have the 4 doors. So in that way, it's a great rival to the Rapide or the Tesla, but in other ways, not so much, because the trunk space, for instance, isn't quite as good, especially when you put the roof down. So in that way, it falls a little bit short of something like an FF, which has great trunk space, or even the Lister Storm, which is quite good as well. And then you don't have any rear view in the car also. That's something which a lot of people overlook, but just like the Maserati MC12, you can't see out the back. And although that may not sound like something that would annoy you, it really could, quite quickly. When you're pottering around town trying to park the thing, that would get annoying real fast. Now, it's not bad enough to demote it down the list, it's only a small nitpick, but still, it's something to be noted. And it's a slight demerit compared to, again, stuff like the FF or the Lister, which just doesn't have that problem. Now, overall, it's not the kind of car that I think, even if I had the cash, I would be able to get, because as I discussed in Unsung Heroes, it seems to be a very, not shady car, but a very obscure one. I don't know how many were built, I don't really know the price, I don't know if anyone actually bought one, they seem to have, but it's kind of a grey area almost. It was rebadged by a Chinese company, I think it was, and turned into a crazy powerful electric version, which I love the concept of. This list has shown that I have love for electric cars, and will continue to do so, spoiler alert. But for me, this one's kind of like the SSC Ultimate Aero. I prefer the V8 over the electric one. For me, the Rivale is a car which I love more so in its concept than in its execution. I like what they did with it. I love the layout. The only thing that holds it back for me is the design. The first thing that put me off the car was the design. Then I fell in love with it because of what it was capable of. But, and this is one of the main reasons why it dropped out of my top 10, I realised when I was really honest about it once again, in a similar way to the Chazetta, that I still don't really love the look of the car. I do like it a lot, but I don't love it. And by definition, I don't really feel that I can have a car in my top 10 or even my top 15 that I don't love in pretty much every way, if not every way. So for me, this is just a case where it ticks like 9 out of 10 boxes. It's so close to being a perfect car for me, but the visuals simply aren't as good looking as some of my absolute favourites. However, I do love it a lot, and that's why it definitely deserves a place here. So that's it for this pick overall. Of course, you can check out all of the other episodes in this series by clicking through at the end, but for now, as always, thanks for watching.